Hi guys, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing all the books that I read in October, which was a lot. It's October, it's starting to feel like actual fall. It snowed before Halloween, that was weird, but now it's just windy and cold. But let's get into the books that I read this month. So the first 4 books I read were for a secret, not really secret, a special TBR video vlog thing that's coming up. And basically I read 4 Karen Russell books. I had read part of this one, which is her newest book, Orange World, and I just finished off the stories I hadn't read. I read Swamplandia, which is her novel, Vampires in the Lemon Grove, which is her second story collection, and then Sleep Donation, which is her novella. I read Karen Russell books, and I have a special video that I filmed, special vlog where I'm reading all of her books. So if you want to know about my thoughts on all the books, if you want to know why I was reading her books, stay tuned because that video is coming soon. It was supposed to come out like a week ago, but I didn't finish reading in time. But the next couple books I read are all the books that I was reading for school this month. I'm in a short story fiction class, so we're basically reading short story collections by literary fiction authors. I forget what the theme of this unit was, to be honest. Something about expansive worlds. Not necessarily like fantastical, but just something like that. So the first book we read was an Alice Munro collection. This is Hate Ship, Friendship, Courtship, Love Ship, and Marriage. I've read Alice Munro stories before. I liked some of these, but these weren't my favorite. The other short stories that I've read before, I like a lot more. I don't know which short stories these are, so I can't recommend them to you. But yeah, this is good. Alice Munro is known in the literary fiction world for her short stories, for her craft. I think she is really good about craft. If you like domestic literary fiction, this is the way to go. I personally do not super get into domestic fiction because I am not a married woman or a divorcee, so like I like these stories, I think they're good, but like I can't relate to them, so that always like hinders a little bit my love for them. But what were my favorite short stories? I really like the first one. It's really weird and different. It's kind of historical. I really liked Comfort. That one was interesting. It had like a teacher that taught evolution in a very Christian town. I thought that was interesting. Post and Beam was really sad and depressing. I just really felt for the character in that story. She's like a young woman who like marries like a old professor of hers and just kind of like being in a loveless marriage where there's like a significant age gap. But like all these short stories are good. They're just not my favorite. The next short story collection we read is After Rain by William Trevor. I dented the cover. So, you know, there's that. Only had to read 8 of the 12 short stories, so I still have to read a couple more to finish the collection. So I will be doing that at some point. All of these take place in Ireland, and you can really tell that with some of the language. Me personally, I did not know a lot of Irish slang, so some things were hard to follow for me. I found these stories interesting, but I didn't love this collection by any means. I did not like how William Trevor talked and wrote about women. Just like the way that he described women just like made me very uncomfortable. It's just like very body focused. This was written in 1996, so it's an older book. It's as old as me. It's an old white Irish dude. Some of the stories in here were interesting. It's domestic fiction. Again, it's just not my personal cup of tea. I really hated the story A Day. It's about a woman who can't get pregnant and thinks her husband is cheating on her, or he is cheating on her, and she like is an alcoholic. Didn't like that story at all. The stories I did like were Timothy's Birthday, Gilbert's Mother, and then Lost Ground. Those stories were just really fascinating. The characters were very morally gray. They were talking about more interesting topics than just like a day in the life of somebody. And then the last short story collection we read was Adam Johnson's Fortune Smiles. Some of these stories are speculative, some of them are just kind of not absurd, but they have like a heightened reality to them. I had previously read the first short story in this collection, which is Nirvana, which I absolutely love. It is a speculative, slightly futuristic story, and I just fell in love with it, and I thought I was going to love this collection, but it kind of turned out to be very different than I thought it was going to be. There's like a short story about people in Korea that had previously been in North Korea, living in South Korea. He actually has a whole book about North Korea, a fictitious North Korean story. So I like knew he had connections to that, but I wasn't like expecting a short story about that. There was a short story about a guy who has been sexually assaulted as a child, and kind of in the realm of like the dark web and like, you know, kitty, that, yeah, and he like hunts it down, but he also like gets turned on by it. So like I was not expecting such an extreme story. And then there's like another story about like one of the prisons in the Cold War area of Berlin. Just like a lot of these stories are like a lot more intense than like intense dark subject matter, which I just wasn't expecting by that first story. Actually, a couple of the stories do have characters that deal with like intense illnesses with like a heightened reality behind them, so I thought most of the stories were going to be like that, you know, domestic everyday but like heightened a little bit. That's not the case. So yeah, I don't really know how to feel about this collection. I gave it 4 stars because a lot of it was good. It was just a lot darker and a lot different than what I was expecting. So if you like intense literary fiction, especially with like a heightened absurd reality, maybe check this out, but just be warned, it has intense subject matter. It's very dark. So let's get into the fun books I read this month. First, we're going to go over my mangas. I read Skip Beat volume 44. Every time I pick up a Skip Beat, I'm just like, oh my god. I personally have only been reading Skip Beat for about 6 years, but like some people have been reading this series for 15, which is like insane to me. You can really follow a series for a very long time. This series is like a rom-com type of shoujo manga following a 16-year-old Kyoko who is going to take revenge, not lover, but like the person she had a crush on that kind of like broke her heart. And she's doing that by joining the acting industry, by becoming an actress. So it's wacky, it's kooky, it's so absurd and ridiculous, but I personally think the humor is hilarious. Will say though, like the next couple books, the next arc, I do think has been kind of a dip. It seems to me like the artist has been going through like a rough patch, either just drawing or with like inspiration. So I'm hoping we can get back on track with like the plot soon, but I love this series, it's fun. And then the next manga I have is Aoharu Ride volume 13 by Io Sakisaka. This is the final volume and it's mostly kind of like short story wrapping up the end of the manga. I love this series. It's one of the more realistic romantic comedies in the shoujo manga category. Most shoujo mangas, you know, are kind of like ridiculous, absurd, not super realistic, and I love those. But I also like this, where it's super realistic, the characters are flawed, they're growing, they're learning, they're dealing with stuff, and I love this series. I'm so glad I got to collect it in English. And now let us get to all of the regular books I read. So one of the first books I read this month was Alatsoe by Darcy Littlebadger. This was perfect for Halloween, kind of had a light spooky vibe to it. It takes place in a world where like stories and mythology exists in real life. There's vampires, there's fae. But most importantly, this book centers around our main character, Alatsoe. Alatsoe goes by Ellie, and she is Native American, and her ancestors' like legends live on. And Ellie is not only able to see ghosts, but she's able to resurrect them. She and her family mostly resurrect animals. They don't mess with human life. And so Ellie like has this dog, Kirby, her little ghost dog, super cute. One of the members of her family dies, and so her and her family kind of go into the mystery of why he died. This is a very friend, family-centered story. Ellie is ace. I'm not sure if she's both ace and aromantic. To me, it seems like she is aromantic because she doesn't want relationships, but I know for sure that she is asexual, and I loved all of that representation. I loved the strong friendship aspect of this book. I loved the family aspect of this book. I loved the magic in the world. In this world, like, magic is known by everybody. It's just like a thing that exists, and it's really nice to have like an urban fantasy like that. I really liked how Ellie's stories about her great-grandmother like played into the plot and played into her. So yeah, this book is like the perfect spooky, fun urban fantasy, and it's also very sweet and impactful too. Just a really well-balanced book. I believe this is Darcy's debut book, which is like a feat onto itself. I think her writing is only going to get better from here. I think that's the only star I ticked off, is that sometimes the writing, especially like the dialogue, just like didn't feel all the way there for me yet. But I'm keeping my eye on this author because I loved her world, I loved her characters, I loved what this book did. It was just so good. So good. The next book I have here is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This is another new release, and it's another spooky book. This book follows Yedriel, who is a trans teen, and in his family they can see ghosts. Lots of ghost stories, I guess, this month. But his family can see ghosts, and the men in his family are able to resurrect the dead. The boys in his family they like resurrect the dead, but they also like put them to rest, help them into the afterlife. And the women in his family have like magical healing properties, also related to like their ancestry and their history. Yadriel like lives in a cemetery with all of his like extended family, and they have like a secret kind of like society around like the mythology and everything. Really love the world, really loved all of that. But with Adrian being trans, he's not accepted for his identity and he's not accepted as a brujo. So like that's kind of the main plot of this. Yadriel wanting to prove himself, and he decides to prove himself by sending a ghost that he finds to the afterlife, who so happens to be somebody that he knows from high school, who is Julian. So it's Julian, Yadriel, and then Yadriel's cousin Maritza, I believe that's how you pronounce it. Sorry. And they're kind of working as a trio to figure out how their cousin died, another dead cousin, but they're trying to figure out why their cousin died and then trying to send Julian back to the land of the dead. And yeah, I love this book. I loved all the ghost aspects. I loved the characters so much. I loved Yadriel and Julian's like banter and then budding relationship. This book was like cute and sweet, but again, there was like intense, darker moments. I will say though, the only thing that like not made me question things, but Julian and Yadriel don't really know each other even though they went to high school together, and the whole entire book of them like growing a relationship and falling in love is like 2.5 days. And for the most part, I like really believed their relationship and I liked it a lot. Like I loved their banter, I loved their chemistry, but like at times I'm just like, maybe like we can stretch this out to a week and a half. Like I need a little bit more time. And there were like plot reasons why that couldn't happen, but for me, I kind of wish they knew each other or had talked to each other before. Just a personal thing. It wasn't insta-lovey. I don't think it really does build the relationship, but like 2 days is a lot to like, you know, be like, I love you, clutching at each other. I'm just like, okay, you guys are just, you know, crazy teens. It's fine. It's a trope in YA. Despite all that, I love this book. I love the characters, love the world. Just, again, this was another really good debut. I'm really looking forward to what else he has written. I believe he has another book coming out really soon too, so I'm excited. The next book I read was Sword in the Stars by Amy Rose Capetta and Corey McCarthy. This is an arc, so I've had this for a while. My friend got this for me. So yes, this is the sequel to Once and Future by the same authors. This is a duology, so this is wrapping up what happened in the last book, and this is a sci-fi retelling of King Arthur with a diverse LGBT cast of characters. Arthur is a girl and she has a sapphic relationship. The first book was pretty kooky, just like a lot happened. These are definitely very plot heavy books. I really liked the characters in the first book. They are so diverse and they're so interesting as a friend group, but because they already knew each other, we didn't get like a lot of them like growing and connecting together over time. A lot of it was just plot focused, which is fine. It's just like not my personal taste. The writing isn't great in the first book, neither is it in here, but I'll get to this book in a second. But like the main issue I had with Once and Future is that it's just like a little too bonkers. It's intense, it's crazy, a lot happens, the romance is pretty insta-lovey, they get married pretty quickly, just a lot happens. Since I give the first book like 2.5 stars, I was pretty prepared to not like this one. I was, you know, I lowered my expectations because I knew it was going to be very absurd, very over the top, a little melodramatic. I think because I was expecting that, this ended up being a little bit more enjoyable. I don't think it was better written. Some of the like plot choices were a little bit just bonkers to me personally, and if you don't like teenage pregnancy stories, don't read this because it has that. I personally don't like to read YA books that have teen pregnancy unless it's like an issue for the book, you know? Like unless it's a book exclusively like talking about teen pregnancy. I don't really like my teenage characters getting pregnant randomly. That's just a personal thing. It's fine. But I just wanted to warn others because I know I would have liked to know that plot point going in to the first book. Again, I like the diverse cast. I especially really love Merlin. He's just like a precious being I want to protect. Again, I was ready for the craziness. I was ready for the kookiness, so this was more enjoyable. I listened to this as an audiobook and I can just kind of like sit back and just like, okay, you know, let the craziness wash over me. I wouldn't really recommend this series, even though it is like great representation for a lot of different things. Just like for me personally, it's like, it's just not that great of a series. It's fine, it's okay. I ended up giving this a 3-star again because it was somewhat enjoyable because I was kind of expecting the tone. Again, if you like really plot heavy books, if you kind of like twists and turns and craziness, maybe this will be for you. I'm more of an internal fantasy sci-fi person, so I prefer more character focused, character driven stories. It wasn't for me, but I'm glad I read it and finished the series. The next book I read was Girl Serpent Thorn by Melissa Bashardust. This is the second novel by this author. I read her first book, which is Girls of Snow and glass? Made of snow and glass? Something with snow and glass. And like that book, this is a sapphic character. She's specifically pansexual, bisexual, and it has like a fairy tale aspect to it. For the first book she wrote, she was inspired by Snow White, and in this book she was inspired by Sleeping Beauty as well as some Persian mythology. So this is in a Persian fantasy setting. It could be related to the first book we read, but like very distantly if that's the case. But this follows a young girl who is poisonous to the touch, and because of that she has basically no relationships. Her family life is really strange. She's very isolated. I could really relate to that aspect of it. And she kind of gets wrapped into the world of Deves, which is kind of like a paranormal, all-powerful being, like I don't want to say genie, but like Ember in the Ashes series has something similar, like I forget what they call them, like a Djinn or something. But basically there are beings in this world that possess magic that are kind of like trickster, fae-ish. You know, it's its own separate thing, so don't like compare them, but like similar traits. This book deals a lot with like monsterhood. There's this great kind of like triangle relationship between a Deve, the main character, and then another Deve who is the villain. I loved the relationship and like the mirroring between the three characters. Like it was so good to like see them all like, you know, be related to each other and like compare themselves to each other. I really loved the internal of this character. I really loved the setting in the world. That dynamic, that three-way dynamic was so on par. But I did end up giving this a 3.5 stars, even though I loved so much of it, and that's because I think it needed to be a little bit longer, and I think the romantic relationship needed to be expanded a little bit more, because the main character is kind of going back and forth between these two love interests. We end up spending a lot more time with one of them than the other one, just like because of the way that the book is structured. There are kind of like these holes where we don't get enough time with that love interest. When it has like this big romantic climax at the end, it just feels like something is a little bit missing for me. I just needed more time with that second love interest. But overall, there's so much this book does right. There's so much that her first book does right too. It's like beautifully lyrical writing. I love the storytelling. I love like the fantasy fairy tale thing. I love the characters. I guess that's what makes me so frustrated, is because I love so much of this book, and because of that it doesn't deserve a 5-star or even like a full 4-star, and I'm just like, I want it to be at that level. It's so close, it's so good, but like it just can't. It's not there yet. But I'm still gonna read this author because I've loved her first 2 books. They're not perfect books, but I do love them. And yeah, I love this author. I love this author. I want to see her succeed. And then the last book I have on here is my favorite book of the month, and probably my favorite book of the year, to be honest. Yeah, it's that good. And that would be This Is How You Lose the Time War by Elmar El Motar and Max Gladstone. This book, okay, I know it's been overhyped, I know people have been talking about it, but it's so weird and so good. It's just so good. It's like this literary sci-fi-y poetry-esque thing. It's an epistolary story between these 2 women on opposite sides of a time war. One of the areas is like super naturey, and one of them is like biotechnology, and they like leave letters for each other and fall in love, and it's just like, it's so weird and just so good and so well written, and I got sucked in. And personally, sometimes when things are too over poetic, I like think they need to be stripped down. Like I can't fall in love with them, but I fell in love with this. It's like the best sapphic story I've ever read. It's the best novel I read this year so far. It's so good. I can't get over it. I want to reread it. I just can't. This book was amazing. I think last month or the month before I read Upright Women Wanted, because I thought it was going to be the same thing as this. I hadn't yet read this, but like I was looking for like short fiction, literary, like lesbian sapphic vibes, and just like really beautiful prose. Like I wanted that, and like that book wasn't that at all. It just like did not give me that. I was looking for this book. I knew I wanted to read this book. I knew that was what this book was, and like yet I was hoping to find it in other books first. But anyway, this book was everything I've been looking for. I've been looking exactly for this. This book is so good. Please read it. Please. It's weird. I know you're not all gonna like it, but you should just read it anyway. It's so good. That finishes up all the books that I read this month. Currently, I am reading Circe. I'm about 75 pages into that, so that is what I'm going to be reading for the next month along with my school reading. November's gonna be a busy month, so we'll see how much I end up reading. But please let me know what you read in October, especially something spooky, something fall. I would love to know. And yeah, I will see you guys with another video soon with my Karen Russell, why I read all of the Karen Russell books ever. So stay tuned for that. I'll see you guys later and happy reading.